open the city council workshop for April 9th, 2024. As we've called this meeting to order. The second item on the agenda is discussion for crosswalk policy.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. After receiving requests for a crosswalk just right out here by Arbor Glens on 39th, the Mayor and two City Council members asked staff to bring this to a workshop in April. On average, we receive 2 to 3 requests, typically in residential neighborhoods each year, about improving some crosswalk safety, whether it's signage or painted lines, etc. Tonight, I'm just bringing this before you to help determine if a crosswalk policy is needed and if council would support it. I've added numerous attachments to maybe give you an idea of what a crosswalk policy might look like and what you might want in it. Currently, we do not have a policy, but we will talk to the traffic experts, transportation experts, and determine on high traffic roads only if a crosswalk device or something is needed at that point. In the past, best practice is we do not do any painting or crosswalk devices in residential areas, only high volume, high speed roads. Typically the county roads are ones that we look at with the county, and the county's transportation team then makes recommendations based on that. I can stand for questions, discussion.
Could you highlight maybe some of the reasons that for why the city has not had a policy related to sidewalks or painting of sidewalks in the past?
So in my 5 years here, I've reached out to engineering a few times about it, and the policy was strictly not to make any recommendations for crosswalk devices, basically because studies have shown that if they're placed improperly or if the wrong device is placed in a crosswalk intersection, that you're oftentimes creating more hazard than you are safety. It oftentimes leads pedestrians into a false sense of security. So we, in the past, haven't used a crosswalk markings or anything in a residential area. So like on Hudson Boulevard recently, we identified an area that we knew pedestrians would be crossing from Union Park, the Springs, a lot of people in that area, and they would likely need to get across to the Dairy Queen and the little mini mall. Now, looking at that, we determined it's very unlikely they would walk all the way down to Keats Avenue at a signaled intersection and then cross. And that's typically where you would want all crossings to be at a controlled intersection. Very seldom or almost never would you want a mid-block crossing. In this location, we then reached out, engineering reached out to some transportation experts, and they agreed that in this location it would be in the best interest, and then they provided examples of what they recommended for crossings. So typical practice has been to reach out to the true experts and then let them guide us.
Okay. Councilmember Holtz?
So for that specific instance, did this discussion ever include, like, what were the variables that in their view meant that this crossed that threshold of it being effective?
So speed is definitely one of them. It's 50 mile an hour down there. The number of pedestrians expected to be crossing that intersection as the Dairy Queen and that little strip mall. So those are variables that they look at. And, you know, there's a bend in that road, so visibility was determined to be an issue. So yes, these are all things that they identify and then check off on a list and then say, okay, this is gonna warrant some devices or markings.
And I may have missed it, probably did. What was the cost for those two signs?
Typically, if we were to go out and buy them, they're gonna be over $5,000. Those, I think, are a little more. They're probably closer to 10 plus for each sign, plus installation. Plus, we had an center island in that area that's raised. And I believe there might be some markings there, so I'm sure we have all of 25,000+, probably even more with that center island in that area.
Those lighted signs?
They are, yeah, solar.
Okay. Councilmember Holtz.
Just to follow up on the price, do we know in terms of access to grants, what is out there for when, if a city determines here's a master plan, here are places where we feel there's a warrant threshold for it, where there are certain grants that are available? Obviously, if it involves schools, there's safe to school grants and that goes through the district. But are there other routes such as through DOT, or even if it's a more of a leisure path with DNR, are there opportunities out there?
I'm sure there are. I'm not aware of. It's not something I've really looked at.
Councilmember Hearn.
Changing topic here a little bit, you mentioned that typically we're receiving 2 to 3 requests per year. Is it the same spot that you're getting the request for each time? Is it different locations? What does that kind of look like?
I guess in my 5 years, they've always been in different locations. Every request I've had has been in a residential area, just crossing over to a park, something like that, so.
And can I follow up
Yes.
on that?
Yep.
What has been kind of the process in that situation?
Since these are residential areas, you know, typically we'll go out and make sure there's even a crossing.
Sure.
You know, we want ped crossings on both sides, and they're not always there. So we don't want to put in lines to somewhere that there is no safe crossing on the other side. So in a couple of those situations, that's exactly what they were. So we had no path to really go to on the other side. So
Okay.
they get ended fairly quick. As that's one of those situations we don't want to encourage people to really cross at that location.
Have there been any requests where you go out and you look at it and, you know, okay, this does make sense, there's access on both sides? And in that situation, then what does the process look like for you guys right now?
So if we had that scenario, which I haven't been involved in any, I would bring that up to engineering. Engineering would review it to then guide, you know, to determine if it even warrants enough to go to the traffic engineer. Then the traffic engineer would then take it and design it to ensure that we're going down the right path and not putting people in hazard.
Okay. Okay, sorry, one more. To kind of continue with that, so Egan's crosswalk policy, they have that really nice flow chart laid out. Is that kind of something similar that you're using? Do we have anything formally like that? Or is it more like that's just kind of the process that you've been using in your years here?
Right, so we've been just following best practice of what Lake Elmo's been doing.
Okay.
We have no flow chart at this point.
Okay.
Question.
Yeah, sorry.
So just following up on your process, Marty, I want to learn a little bit more about the cost. So 5,000 per sign roughly, plus installation. But then before you even get to that point, you're connecting with engineering. And so is that, what engineering? firm?
Focus Engineering.
Okay, so Focus does that as well?
They are not the traffic true experts for crossing, but we'll kind of talk to each other and converse and make sure, okay, are are we looking at something the right way? You definitely don't want to put a crossing in a bad spot over a hill or intersections. Do we have the ped crossings on both sides? So we'll kind of look at different things and bump ideas off each other. And then if we felt, and which we haven't been to that point yet, if we felt that we'd want to take it further, then we'd get a true expert on how to lay that out properly and
And there would be a cost to that?
correct.
Do you have any rough estimates on
I
cost?
don't,
Okay, that's
right.
fine.
yeah,
We even had to do it, so.
right.
So of the crosswalk policies that you provided us with, Marty, are there any examples that stick out to you as something that may be in line with what we have? I notice that primarily they're more commercialized cities with undoubtedly higher traffic volumes in certain locations, but are there any that you would point to and say this looks like something reasonable?
You know, there were a few different flow charts that looked good. I would be cautious to even consider anything in a residential area. We have hundreds of crossings, so if you were to start by doing something in a residential area, I would fear that would open up a lot of things. I would recommend we stay towards high traffic, high speed, if we were gonna do anything.
I mean, certainly there's criteria that these, whether it's, what did I see, Egan, Blaine, just decides to jump.
If, I mean, I
Would
had.
vary,
Yeah, I highlighted a few things that I liked, but in general, if engineering and public works feel that if we did want to travel down this, that maybe we got some professional help with that, a consultant that does, I mean, they do literally, there's people that do nothing but crosswalks.
yeah, I've seen some familiar names on, especially the LRB report. And I have reviewed some federal highway reports and research documents on the topic. So I would agree, want somebody that has experience in that.
I agree with that, Mayor, and also we have to refer to the Minnesota Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices for guidance on location and things of that nature, which I'm sure Focus probably looks at. That's pretty much a standard for non-traffic engineers
Right.
to get some sense of what would be required.
Any more questions for Marty? Yeah, Councilmember Holtz.
So like within the packet on page 200 and, I just had it, I think it's 231, like they have a flow chart, I think it's Egan, for the various thresholds for, based upon traffic counts and the various variables, and then there's, it's color coded for, okay, if it's this color, here's your threshold. Is that their own creation, or is that based upon a higher authority saying, here are the best practices? Was this a discretionary chart that they created?
I would have to assume they had somebody help them with this for sure.
It's probably based on previous research and documentation. It's not very common that somebody just creates
Right.
something of that nature from scratch. Councilmember Beckstrom.
I guess I just want to just add a comment around this. If we move forward with any sort of policy, I think it's important that we look at the science and the guidance. And if there isn't evidence that suggests that a crosswalk is creating safety, which there's a study in here that indicates as much, that a marked versus unmarked crosswalk, there really was no difference in safety with that. And so I think we just have to be careful about opening a can of worms here, because we do have quite a number of residential developments. I know my own development asked for crosswalk and electric signs to walk over to the park, and it wasn't supported by public safety, which makes sense. So I just want to be really careful, because it seems like there's a fairly substantial cost to this if we go down this path from, you could estimate anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000 for a crosswalk easily with these. So I would just want to make sure it's evidence-based and indeed improves the safety, and is not just the perception of safety.
I would probably say that, and that, not reading every word of the policies, but that's probably the gist of what cities have done, given that city engineers, they look at studies and research and make sure, it's really their job to make sure we don't put public in harm's way unnecessarily. It's a, it's a credo in your professional engineering license that you don't do that. So, I could see having something on paper that tells us, whether something's, much like, signal systems, right? They require to meet warrants typically. A traffic engineer will say, well, you have certain amounts of traffic at certain amounts of speeds, and you have close access points, so this is really kind of the minimum you need to install a signal system. I could see something like that being for, having certain thresholds for having crosswalks be an option.
There would be, I don't know if you've read some of the policies in here, there would be a study, at request, and when do we decide when we want to invest time into a study. Pedestrians are typically counted, so
Yeah.
hire either somebody to sit out there, or we have to pull a staff member away, and it could be for an hour, random days, or longer, full day.
Why don't we, I would suggest that we, get some of those questions answered as to maybe what, one, what is the cost to hire an expert to help with the development of a policy? Two, once you have a policy, what is the typical cost for finding out if that intersection meets the thresholds? We should get some of these questions answered, I think, before we just make a decision.
And I think a fair amount of that is included in some of the research from the MnDOT article. And I'm pretty sure that the flow chart from Egan's, that's on page 224. I think most of the information from that flow chart is taken from that article from MnDOT.
From the LRB, which stands for Local Road Research Board.
And again, going back to if we're getting 2 to 3 requests per year, or Marty's getting 2 to 3, so, maybe it's actually 5 or 6 between other people reaching out to council members or whoever, whatever it might be. I personally do like kind of a model like that, like Egan's flow chart, where, the 2 requests that Marty's getting per year, they'd be off. It'd be taken off the books right away. It's just, there's no way that those are valid for a crosswalk, but at least we have some sort of policy in place that we can bring back, and we can say to the residents, hey, like, this is why we're not gonna move further with this. But in the situation where, okay, it does meet these criteria, at least then we're starting to go through that process. Personally, I really do like that flow chart. I personally like Blaine's policy better. I think it leaves a little bit more, I think they define a little bit more. They specifically talk about arterial roadways where they're not gonna do any crosswalks without some sort of traffic light signal or some sort of enhanced control for anything over, I think it was 40 miles per hour, it might have been 30. So they leave a little bit more decision to the commissions, to the council, which I feel like would fit well with Lake Elmo. So personally, as I read through it, I thought Blaine's policy I liked the most. I thought it would fit the best with Lake Elmo, just with that addition of the flow chart from Egan. Because I feel like that would just weed out so many right away that just would not even make sense to go through that whole process with. And it looks like with that, it doesn't even get to the engineering until it meets those, right? So it would be on staff to go out and measure, okay, like site visibility and lighting, what does that look like? Is there parking around it or no parking? So a lot of these would just be not even considered then beyond that. But it would at least give that opportunity for where it could make sense. So that was my 2 cents from reading through those. I think Blaine has the best policy that would fit with Lake Elmo, just with a little bit of Egan's flow chart brought into it.
Councilmember Holtz.
I agree with Mayor Cadenhead on the process standpoint. I also agree with Councilmember Hearn in terms of Blaine. I thought theirs was the most effective. I don't think any of them were bad, but I think Blaine was probably the most effective and the most applicable. In terms of that first step from a policy standpoint, do we have a current policy or even a precedent as a policy if an entity decides to donate money to pay for the solar crossing? Do we have a policy or even a precedent for how we handle that?
We do not.
And obviously there's the issue of right-of-way and long-term maintenance, but has it happened historically? Obviously, we have more of a recent situation now, but has it happened before?
I mean, we have different donations that happen. I can't think of anything in the street-related, lights, anything. We get trees, benches, a lot of park items.
Yeah.
If that,
Just a thought as to if presuming we go down this route of starting with policy, I think that would be something to at least document in there as to how that works if an entity wishes to donate for that. What are the criteria? Obviously, working with, make sure it's not in the right of way. But personally, I would be very more receptive to making sure that we're definitely being flexible. If someone's willing to help with that and they deem it to be a priority, as long as there's not a distinct visible harm, let's be partners.
Yeah, the research indicates that, and it's kind of not very intrinsic, that there's an FHWA study, and actually one of the study locations was in Stillwater, Minnesota, that indicated drivers' attention really doesn't vary from standard with painting on the pavement. In other words, they're gonna travel as they normally do unless there's certain extenuating circumstances. I think that's maybe a lot of times we see predominantly crosswalks happening at, along with trail sidewalk connections, but also signalized intersections, because the driver has to be aware of the signal as well as it's going on. So even if somebody were to donate, you'd still, I believe, need a policy that shows that you're meeting the criteria for one to be installed. In other words, if somebody just wants one installed and says, I'll pay for it, I don't think that's a valid reason. Councilmember Dragisich.
Here, I would agree with that. I'd also add that as we consider whether we should develop a policy, and I kind of like policies personally, because it gives you some guidance, but I think we also have to then take a look and say, if we put together a policy, do we have places where that policy would require we would now have to install a crosswalk? So we don't have a policy and then find that there are 14 locations, this policy would require a crosswalk that currently are not crosswalk. Not that that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just a piece of information we ought to have, so we know, how that would fit with our current situation.
Right.
I'm sorry if so I think most of the policies that are laid out, it really is based upon requests. None of them are stating, and maybe I missed that, but it didn't look like any of them were stating that if it meets this criteria, sidewalk or crosswalk must be installed. So it was really more based off of if the request is brought. In which I think, that's probably why we're having this discussion in the first place, right? Is we get a lot of requests or the council gets requests for this. And I think that kind of goes back to like trying to figure out like why are we having this conversation? And I think a big part of it is businesses, pedestrians are looking for some sort of path, right? And again, Blaine even talks about this where it says they want to put these where significant pedestrian concentrations occur or where pedestrians would not otherwise recognize the proper place to cross. And so I think it kind of goes, and this can probably fall into our next topic tonight, the Old Village Master Plan of where do we want to direct traffic? And I think that should be, a big part of this discussion for the crosswalk policy as well as utilizing it as a way to help guide traffic pedestrians to where we feel would be the safest, even if it, if it maybe isn't the safest because if they have to cross across County Highway 15, but it still will guide them to where we think is the safest location, or we have that ability to.
That's kind of where I was falling in terms of, say, it does relate to the next item with the OV master plan, but when we talk about thresholds and obviously with traffic signals, it's the warrants. So let's say there's a similar process. If we have pedestrians crossing at 4 different spots on 14, because there's not necessarily a preferred place to go that's already signalized and this is considered the safe place, technically, if none of them meet that threshold, but all of a sudden now there is a spot and this is the designated spot and then people are going there, that actually would change the number for that spot and it might hit that, what the policy says is the threshold. So that's where it does kind of touch on this next topic, but I fully agree with Councilmember Hearn about some of the feedback that we are hearing from our businesses and from our residents is, where do you want us to go? Crossing 14 is not safe, period. And the county knows this, but the county's not going to do anything until 14 is redone. And it sucks. We can't do anything about it. We've pushed on it. But until that happens and we get additional easements for things, what can we do in the meantime? And that's where I don't know if it's this policy or if it's the next one, but where do we want pedestrians to go? Pedestrians who are with their children on a road that speed limit's 40, but we're not going 40. So that's where I was coming from with this request, so that.
Well, regardless on that, I'm sorry, I'll get to you in just a second, just with relationship to CASA 14 or any county state aid highway, the city's not gonna get the authority to put a crossing or a crosswalk across the roadway without the blessing from their traffic engineer. So that's the one hurdle that would put that one to bed for the city in a fairly quick manner. Just to make that note, because we don't own that roadway, we don't control that roadway, even though we tie into it. Councilmember Backstrom.
I was just gonna share that as well. I think that's out of our control. We can't put a crosswalk across 14. We know it's an issue until the county is able to do that. Us having a policy or even talking about much of that really isn't gonna go anywhere. And I also just want to remind us that we have 25 square miles of city, not just the village, to think about when it comes to crosswalks. And so while we can talk about businesses downtown and directing people and with crosswalks, we also have many, many, many large developments that could require crosswalks if we're not very careful about how we approach this. And which is why I would be in favor of a policy that simply outlines our process for evaluating a crosswalk. I'm not sure I love the idea of putting in specific criteria because I think from a policy standpoint and from a risk standpoint, it positions the city to potentially have to put crosswalks in where they're not today. regardless of what the policies for other cities say, if we have a policy in place that has specific criteria that we need to have a safety crosswalk in place and we don't have it and an accident happens there, what is our liability as a city if we didn't put that crosswalk in? I think we have to be careful about opening up liability for the city based on what we put in our policy. So I'd prefer something a little more vague than specific to criteria, just from that angle of it.
I would think if we had it for requested sidewalks, because first and foremost, I mean, if there's an opportunity to, at least in my opinion, if there's an opportunity or a reason, a justification to keep our residents safe, then I'm all for that. And I think those instances need to be addressed. What are we, what city are we if we don't have safe residents, I guess, is what I would heed caution to. And as a growing city, I'm sure we'll run into instances, given traffic volumes and speeds, where it is something that will, if not in place already, likely need to be addressed in the future. So I guess if there's, I would, much to what Council Member Hearn indicated about the Blaine policy, about reviewing intersections that get requested, if there's some criteria for that, then some of them will fall away right away based on the flow chart. Some will go to the next level. But again, if it meets, if all the engineering about roadways is about trying to make it safe for people that drive on them, use them, walk across them, bike, whatever mode of transportation that they do. And I think as a city, we need to take that responsibility for safety of the residents, however they choose for their mode of traffic, with some sincereness. And it would be nice to have a policy that gives some guidance as opposed to help provide transparency, I believe, openness about, what it really takes to require these things on safety. What is this document? I'm like in page 233 where they start talking about different costs for different kinds of, we may need to look at, safe routes to school or things like that provide opportunities for funding. But, that's something we would have to consider in that type of development, I guess I would say. But generally, I mean, do they belong in neighborhood settings like where I live? I would say no. There's plenty of, just traveling around, there's plenty of roadways that have smaller amounts of traffic. It's lower speeds where they're not really maintainable, they're not useful, but you do find some higher speed areas where, but if not handled properly, I mean, I'll just attest to it. My son was hit in a crosswalk that was lit. He did have the right of way. He pushed the button, the lights were going, and hit by a car. Well, it didn't make it any safer for him. But I think overall a policy should be made so that we can make informed decisions as a city related to the safety for pedestrians and people using other modes of transportation than a vehicle. Councilmember Holtz.
Agreed with most of that. Two smaller questions, slightly related but not. Has the county started to have their conversations now as for 14 regarding their greenway and the path going eastwards? I'm under the impression that they've reached out to the city and/or others.
Yeah, I mean, at the last park commission meeting, there's a representative came and discussed that and just kind of gave an update on where things are at. There's still not a set path or plan for 14, but
Have they found a funding source yet for that, or are they still not at the point where they even have identified a funding source?
I don't believe that they have.
All right. And then follow up, when new developments come in, and our development is a prime example, and so is Wildflower, and all of our new developments that we've had recently in the last decade, and they're painting crosswalks. Who told them to, where, and then what is our process for, residents might be used to that being a place to cross, and again, not talking about the science or the data about it, but that has become a place. They're thinking that the city said this is a place to go, and it might be because Andy Chase painted it.
Right. Yeah, so currently those are designed by the developer's engineer, along with where the trees are placed and stuff, and engineering reviews, and Public Works review many of the assets and such, but there are things that maybe we don't look into as much as maybe we should. Our plan right now is we don't have a budget for restriping any of those crosswalks, so there is no plan. They would likely just fade.
And sorry to put you on the spot with all these questions, but
No,
this
that's all
this
right.
is your,
Yeah, no, we don't have there's no budget for restriping stop signs, crosswalks, et cetera.
thank you.
I do need to pay attention to time a little bit here as we're past our 7 o'clock, so I would like to try and be concise here and give staff some direction. Is it amenable to have them take a stab at looking at some policy and coming up with some, there are some costs that are in there, maybe finding out what the cost is per review, or coming up with a plan, what that cost would be. Can we get some consent on that being a motion forward?
I think your earlier suggestion 20 minutes ago was really start to do down the policy route, see what the costs are for certain things, and at least
Yeah.
start to piece things together.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have enough? Do you feel like you have enough feedback to start to piece a couple recommendations for an initial policy that's high level, but
Are you looking for staff and engineering to put that together, or do you want a consultant assistant?
I guess it would, just gathering the information, and I guess I would be looking for staff to see what, you can check around and see what it would cost for a consultant to have input on a policy, and some, maybe they're, somebody has something they've done before and would recommend that, or traffic's traffic. It really is.
So,
We've talked a little bit about the Blaine policy, which is fairly compact, pretty broad. It would seem like working to maybe amend that to fit the city of Lake Elmo might be a real good place to start.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to exploring the cost, but as I've looked through the policies, theirs was fairly compact, fairly broad, but it still gave a policy that we could work with. And perhaps one of B might be, the understanding of what is already covered by, I think it's 167, the statute talks about pedestrian crossings as well.
Yeah.
And so there's some statutory things that are automatically there, depending on the street and that. But it might be good to kind of put those in so everyone knows that this is required by law.
I'd be fine with that.
And so we could just take this policy, which is actually pretty good already, make some amendments to fit Lake Elmo, and we'd have a reasonable policy.
Started.
It would be, maybe we could get a traffic engineer to review it at some point, but we could frame it up and get it 90% of the way there.
You know, I think the part that Blaine is missing, especially from our discussion tonight, is it doesn't have a very clear policy of what should we even consider? And I think if we take that, again, that flow chart from Egan, that's gonna disqualify any of the neighborhoods that want to request a sidewalk. It's just gonna be an immediate, you don't have 1,000 cars going through this intersection a day. This is not gonna be an option.
Yeah. Flow charts are always nice.
Yeah.
Enough?
I think yeah,
Okay, I can start with that.
great, thank you.
Thank you.
Gonna move on to item number 3, which is Old Village Master Plan. Director Stopa.
Is up there? Okay. All right, so as you know, the moratorium was adopted on February 6th, and it has a maximum duration of 1 year. The legislative findings, this is in the ordinance when it was adopted, the moratorium was adopted, is that the city needs to study the required utility corridors, the city needs to update its village master plan in order to provide guidance on development and redevelopment in the old village corridor area, and that it's in the best interest of the city to impose a moratorium on development within the old village corridor area so that it could study the required infrastructure and update the village master plan. So the issue before the council is specifically the scope, and specifically, it's should the council approve an update to the Lake Elmo Village Area Master Plan as part of the moratorium study. This was last updated in 2007. You can kind of see the main site plan, master plan that came from that village plan. So we've been working with our planning consultant, Bolton and Menk, and we asked them for some options, and they came up with essentially 2 phases. So phase 1, and then it would be, if you want to go to the route and add phase 2, so it's, phase 1 plus phase 2. So phase 1, the first task would be to review the old plan, the 2007 plan, the comprehensive plan, and the zoning code. The second task would then have community meetings. Third would be to recommend amendments, and that's how we would get out of the moratorium with the changes to the zoning code. That would take about 4 to 5 months. Phase 2 is essentially tasks 1 through 3, with task 4 being the new master plan, the book, and that would take 6 to 8 months after the approvals would go through and the moratorium would be lifted. So I hope you could see this. It's a schedule and cost. I wanted to include it from the Bolton and Mink proposal. You can see in green that those tasks would end at the end of August. Phase 2 would bring that out into November. The deadline to remove the moratorium is in February. We also wanted pricing, so phase 1 is $10,500 to include the plan, $18,500 for a total of $29,000. I want to talk about advantages and disadvantages of doing phase 1, well, basically both phases, but in phase 1 only, obviously it's going to cost less and it's going to take less time. It also would allow the department to accept land use applications, which could result in development sooner. The disadvantage is it really limits the scope of what we're looking at. It's a review of those existing plans and then making amendments, and maybe not addressing other areas that have come up in the past, some of the issues that people have mentioned about the village area. And then phase 2, I would really want to read this because we could figure out the detail too moving forward, is the advantage is it would better align the zoning code to the village area's needs as of today. It would provide an updated area plan that will be incorporated in the next comprehensive plan. I think this is important as we enter into the comprehensive plan, I believe in 26, 27 for the next round. It would give us a document that we could work off now with our needs currently, and it would make it easier when we update the next comprehensive plan. It would address design standards that are currently not listed in the Lake Elmo design guidelines. Those design guidelines aren't perfect. They're not, it's a little bit difficult to apply to the village overlay. It would be nice to add design standards specific to the village overlay that complement the design guidelines that are already adopted. It would also update sub-districts. The village area has the village area, it has the civic district, it also has an area called the station district. That's basically the land east of what's developed. It could also assist with grant applications because you have a new plan. A lot of times grants want to know if it's part of your plan, right? Review infrastructure needs for pedestrian safety. I think the other piece of this is it could create a plan for the reuse of the old fire station and parks building. I think this is really important. Instead of moving forward with maybe bidding, accepting the highest bid, we could go through a process and understand what residents want for this site. Also could look at maybe an RFP process, so it's a competitive bid process for these properties. The other things that are included in the old plan, also in the comp plan, are how do we connect the Village Parkway North to Stillwater Boulevard? Consider road connectivity from the developed downtown area to the surrounding land within the village area. Also review land uses for the undeveloped land, both on the west and the east of downtown. That may be something we would want to modify from the comprehensive land use plan and give us guidance in the future as development comes and wants to seek to develop that property. And we've talked about the signage requirements in the past. We've been holding off on that to get a better idea of what people want to see in the village. Obviously, the disadvantages are the cost and the time would increase, and then it could potentially slow down an acceptable development. We are making a recommendation just because, based on the legislative findings, we believe Phase 2 best addresses the legislative findings that are in the ordinance that was adopted. I'm here to answer any questions. We also have Nathan here from Bolton and Menk if there's anything specific to the proposal that they've submitted.
I would just say, back a page and then one more. Oh, wait a minute, no, go forward one. So in that would be to consider not just road connectivity, but multimodal connectivity for developed downtown area. We were just talking about crosswalks and pedestrians and bicycle usage. And I think part of that is having developments that are close to the downtown, hopefully drive some economic development that's wanted, needed. Mixed areas is part of that equation. Councilmember Dragisich.
Yeah, I just one question that came up in my thoughts as I was looking through this. The moratorium we currently have, does that block any development at all? Or let's say we had a use right now that was conforming and someone wanted to put a different type of use to it, but still was permitted use under the zoning code, would that be blocked?
It wouldn't be blocked, but it would not allow someone to basically create an addition or change the site, you know, add parking or landscaping. It kind of, the moratorium specifically lists, and I have it here just so everybody, because this question has come up. It's a moratorium on development projects, and that means any site plan, subdivision, plat, plan unit development, variance, conditional use permit, or interim use permit. Somebody could receive a permit and build out, let's say, because we've heard like an ice cream shop, as long as they weren't modifying the site.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Hearn?
When you move from Phase 1 to Phase 2, is there a reason we couldn't lift the moratorium after Phase 1 rezoning, when we're done with that, and then we're working on updating the master plan? Is there a reason we have to wait till the
No,
end?
you could actually lift it at that point. The challenge would be, you're doing a lot more work in Phase 2 to understand maybe potential changes, like we need more commercial in the station district, or something may come up, right? And then you're amending it again. So if
Amending
there,
the zoning.
zoning
code,
twice
okay.
is essentially what could happen if you don't wait.
But that, at least it's an option.
It's an option,
Okay.
yeah.
Councilmember Beckstrom?
I'm not sure if this is a question for you or for Carissa. Where in our 2024 budget did we put money in there to complete a master plan? Or where would we get $29,000 to do this work?
It's currently not budgeted for this project. We'd have to talk to finance specifically about potentially doing a budget amendment to include this for this year.
My next question is, where on our priority list does this fit? Our strategic plan that we defined a year and a half ago? Where does this item, it popped up out of nowhere, and we're looking at $30,000 to what? I don't even know why we have this moratorium. I voted against it because I don't understand why we're doing this right now with everything we have going on in our city. So I need to understand why this is a priority at this point, and we should do a budget amendment to pay for it.
Well, I could speak to the fact that the moratorium was adopted, and there's certain legislative findings that we can't just get out of the moratorium
Yeah, I know
quickly.
that. I know that
So,
part.
I mean, I think since it has been adopted, we've been in a position of how do we move forward? And one of the things we wanted to do is get this proposal from Bolton and Mank. And that's where we've landed at this point, just because we can't just get out of it at this point, now that it's been adopted.
But do we need to spend $29,000? I mean, and that's what I'm struggling with here. This was not on our priority list. And $30,000 for a plan is, at this point, with everything going on in the city, to me, seems concerning. And so I'm trying to understand the recommendation for doing the two-phased approach with the $30,000 price.
I think it just gives us everything that I've been hearing that people have asked for, and I think it lines up more with the legislative findings. It's definitely a council decision on how they want to move forward with this, if they don't want to pay for the plan. But we definitely need guidance on kind of the scope and what we're looking at moving forward.
So all right, so I'd just like to offer my understanding of the moratorium was that there were certain pieces, at least with the current zoning, that didn't necessarily mesh very well with the original concept back in, I don't know, over the last decade, and there were some businesses that some people probably didn't want to see in the old village area, and try and understand and grasp that we should probably take some time and find the ability to craft the old village area that's attractive to businesses and residents to use that area. Some people are going to agree, some people are going to disagree. So it's possible to do just phase one to lift the moratorium and then look at the budget in the future to allocate for phase two, right?
That's correct.
I mean, you could shelf it for a period of time.
That's correct.
And then, just a question for Finance Director Clarissa, do we have any discretionary funds? I believe I remember seeing a budgetary item that was listed in the budget for items that may come up.
We do have a, what did we call that? That $35,000 kind of at the end of the budget there that had been set aside in previous years, so we had left that in. We also, I mean, the general fund, I wouldn't speak to a number, but I believe we've had a surplus for the last couple of years, so there's certainly cash available. It's up to council as far as whether we direct that towards this or, and I don't remember, Jason, did you mention that you had a staffing position that was not yet filled?
The plan reviewer?
Yeah, so I don't know if that's a,
And not that I, obviously don't want to be willy-nilly with dollars that taxpayers put in, but I think this is something that's beneficial for the whole city and the businesses involved. But Councilmember Dragisich.
Mayor, I like your suggestion, if I'm hearing you correctly, that perhaps we could do the option 1 this year, lift the moratorium, and budget for option 2 in a future year. We kind of get the best of both worlds in some way and manage our budget.
That was my recommendation. Councilmember Beckstrom.
Can we cut down the cost of phase one? Because that's $10,000. So that, to me, is still a lot of money for a plan. And I guess I need to understand what the other issues in the village are. I clearly have been left out of the loop because I don't know what all these issues are in the village that this moratorium was meant to correct. Other than it sounds like to prevent business growth in the village, if we're wanting to keep specific types of businesses out, that doesn't seem right to me, to put a moratorium in place for that.
What are you specifically talking about with the issues?
You referenced other issues in village in one of your slides here as a reason for doing this. It might have been early on in your presentation, but you referenced there's issues to be addressed within the old village, and I guess I just need to understand the scope of what those issues are we need to resolve with this moratorium and the phase one plan.
I'm just trying to find specifically. the
Sorry, I should have
issues.
made note of which
Yeah.
slide.
Okay, so, the other issues would just be this larger scope of everything that's included in terms of pedestrian connectivity, the reuse of the old fire station parks, all these other issues that have been brought up that we've added to the phase two, that would be added into the actual document.
Possibly state the Lake Elmo, current Lake Elmo Elementary School site.
But what's the urgency? What are the issues that was the urgency for the moratorium? I'm missing something here, because the things that are being talked about don't seem like they require an immediate review, and so there must be something else that I'm not seeing here that is pressing that we need to get resolved in the next 6 months. I guess I'm just looking for
Yeah.
help on
Yeah.
what those issues are.
Well,
so-
I think that the issue is, it was directly the land use issue and what uses should be there, correct? That I think is why the moratorium is in place. Also, it mentions studying the pedestrian connectivity and some of the other, let me just bring it back to the slide. It's specifically was adopted to study the utility corridors, road right-of-way, also looking at infrastructure and whether or not, you want to update the village master plan. So the legislative finding in the moratorium that was adopted has a fairly large scope. So, that's why we're here asking for direction on how we are going to proceed with this, because based on this, it looks like a pretty large scope from the moratorium. So that's why we recommended phase 1 and 2, because it addresses what's in the moratorium.
Well, can we just limit it to whatever the main issue is and cut the cost? I mean, if it's zoning or land use, can we just limit it to just the land use and get that done quickly and under $10,000 and be done with this? mean,
I think if that's
was
the
driver-
direction, just as the moratorium is stated, that's the direction of the council, and the council wants to just focus on that, then that's always, yeah, I think, yes, definitely, I think it's an option to look at land uses as part of the study. My only concern with answering it that way is the moratorium does state that these are the findings, and there's a process when you implement an interim zoning district with the state statutes, is you have to state your legislative findings and go through this process, so.
And what we're looking for today is general feedback from the council, so we can come back where you're gonna take a vote on something. And so I guess the question more, if we want to focus on, what is the length and the breadth of the study that you want to do? We've heard some people say we would just want to do the phase 1 and do phase two and next year and, or do the whole thing all at once? Those are kind of the information and the feedbacks we're looking for as staff to help guide us.
Councilmember Holtz.
Thank you for putting this together and for documenting, based upon what we already voted upon, some of the advantages and disadvantages with each plan, in seeing the pretty objective advantages that are listed in option 2. At this point, my preference is that we go with both at this point, but I understand the kind of the solution that both of you have offered. And if there's that route, I would just want to make sure that we are still saying we're going with option 2. Maybe just option 2 is starting with in the new year. Because these are all substantial value gains. Nearly every one of those is something that either we've had a resident talk to us about, a business owner, something that we see where there are gaps between the comp plan and reality. These are things that are coming up right now. So I don't know if a sense of urgency is not the right word for it, but this is our job. So I have no issue with going with option 1 and 2 at this point. I think it's being more transparent to say what the plan is going to be for this process, especially for staff. Because if we say, oh, we're going with option 1, we might go with option 2. That's not necessarily, to me, what staff would want to hear for knowing what's on the radar. But if the position is we're going with option 1, and then we shall initiate option 2, in the start of the new year, I support that.
Councilmember Hearn.
I think this is, I think it's a good investment. I know it was not budgeted for. We do have the discretionary funds for it. Looking at the village plan that was put together in 2007 or 2007, it's an excellent plan, but a lot has changed since then. A lot has, I think a lot of what was initially planned was not able to be completed because of the Met Council, direction we had to take with that. This is gonna bring more businesses to the city if we do it right. It's gonna mean, it's gonna be helpful for the economic development, it's gonna bring tax paying money, so I look at this as an investment. And with that being said, I do want this moratorium to be lifted sooner than later. The last thing I want us to do, or that government should be doing, is telling businesses when or when they can't be doing stuff. So I tend to, at this point, if it's possible to lift that moratorium after we're completed with phase 1, I do still feel it's important to move forward with phase 2 and look at that village master plan again, because I think that's really gonna be the meat and potatoes of it, where we can get the most from this. Yes, it costs more, but again, I think it's an investment that we will reap the benefits from as a city down the road. So my preference would be, if that's possible, once the phase 1 is done, the rezoning has been completed, that we are able to lift the moratorium, but then still move forward with that, the old village plan, revisiting that.
Okay.
Councilmember Backstrom.
I think it's a bad idea, and I'm very concerned about the money that's been spent by this council this year, since terminating our administrator and going through and having that added expense this year. I think we need to be cognizant of the money that's being spent that we didn't plan for. Yes, there might be some discretionary dollars that were in the budget last year. Well, how much money did we spend to hire a consulting firm to find us a city administrator? How much are we spending on the payout to the last city administrator? We need to be good stewards of dollars and not just simply spend because we think it's a good idea and an idea pops up. This is something that was absolutely not on any strategic plan that I've seen or was a party to in the last 2 years. It was not anything we talked about until it popped up one day on the agenda to vote for a moratorium. So I think it's wasteful at this point to spend $29,000 or even $10,000 on a study that, frankly, I still don't quite know what the hell we're doing, because it's no one can seem to articulate what the problem is that we're trying to solve, that again created the urgency to put a moratorium in place. So I don't agree with any part of this. I think it's not good use of limited dollars that we have in the city. And we can cite our comp plan and the need to do this for guidance in that, but I'll remind this council that they have made changes to our comp plan. How many times when it's come before us to make a change, we don't live by our comp plan. So to say we want to do some of this in preparation for creating our next comp plan or for having a village master plan that we intend to follow, we don't follow plans. If somebody proposes something different and we like it, we change things. So I just simply don't support any part of this.
All right, so we've heard from Councilmember Beckstrom. I think the rest of the council would appreciate moving into phase one and looking at phase two potentially in the future. That's what I got.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. All right, item number 4 is public safety aid allocation.
Mayor and council, I don't have a formal presentation tonight. I just have some information for you to review and get some options from you and some direction from you from what was provided in the staff report. In the 2023 legislative session, the state of Minnesota allocated $300 million to local governments in the eyes of public safety. The city of Lake Elmo received $553,000 of that. And that was received by the city December 26th of last year. Tonight, just looking for guidance on how we utilize those public safety dollars. The eligible uses were pretty specific on, pretty broad on what you can use it for, and then pretty specific on what you can't use it for. Some of the eligible uses are community violence prevention, intervention programs, community engagement, mental health crisis response, victim services, training programs, first responder wellness, equipment related to fire rescue and emergency services, and then to pay other personnel or equipment costs. They did get into some pretty specific things you can't use them for, especially related to certain law enforcement activities. But really looking for your guidance on how we should utilize these dollars. Just within the past, about the past month, I know there's some bills proposed in at the current legislative session right now to kind of have cities report back what they've spent these dollars on. In the initial bill, there was no reporting requirement. It was pretty broad. But I think now with, especially tied to some of the law enforcement uses that municipalities or organizations can't use these for, I think that's where some of the bill traction is. The state looks at public safety pretty defined on what it is, and worked with administrator and finance director on just kind of figuring out ways on maybe some options for us to utilize these dollars. So in your packet, I did include some high-level ideas of kind of what I've come together with our command staff and our general staff on what can we do with these dollars if we're able to utilize them, and provided some examples for you, and just kind of want to have a discussion around those dollars. When I originally looked at these and looked at what other communities are doing, it's extremely broad on what everybody's frankly doing with these dollars. Cities that have an immediate need for fire truck purchase took these dollars immediately and put it into their current truck purchase. We could retroactively, cover expenses that we had last year pertaining to almost anything on the fire department side of things, and cover those dollars with the money we received. When I kind of look at it, I look at some of the things that we had. Definitely one item we identified in just the construction of the building here is just our 800 megahertz radio coverage. You really don't know until a building's done on what that radio coverage is going to be. And for us, it's pretty poor in this building. So looking at a radio repeater would be extremely helpful to us, and also the sheriff's department on the other side of the building. We look at, as we grow our department, how we maintain and change our policies. There's a policy program that looks at industry best standards and really maintains and creates our fire department staff policies, personnel policies, and our operational policies at a very high level, something that we would have a very difficult time doing at the staff level. And then I look at things that we can do to benefit the community risk reduction. We have on-staff CPR instructors, and in order for them to maintain their CPR cards and their instructor certifications, they have to teach. And we would love to offer classes here to our community for certified CPR or even hands-only CPR. Well, that comes with a cost of just getting some equipment we don't have to put those classes on for our residents or our business community. Same thing with a fire extinguisher training. We'd love to offer that as part of our commercial building inspection program, where we can go out to our business community and provide that required training that these places need to maintain OSHA standards and other standards that they have in the business world. So tonight I've got Assistant Chief Savoda and Captain Mike Schwartz to kind of talk about what it could look like for community risk reductions if we have some programming, and then Mike has a specific talk about the department joining the Washington County Fire Department dive team and kind of what that would mean for the department with and needing funds for that as well. So I'll let Assistant Chief Savoda talk first and then open it up for questions and discussion.
Thank you. So when you think about fire prevention in our community, we've been doing fire prevention activities and talks for years. And it's always been reliant on the number of volunteers that we could get on a specific day to go out and do those things. And so the messages weren't always consistent. We weren't able to get to businesses and schools and so on every year, for example. And then COVID hit, of course, that didn't help us. But now that we have consistent staffing, we want to take our fire prevention program and turn it into a community risk reduction program where we're still talking about the classic fire prevention things, but really, just like the chief mentioned, taking the opportunity with some new tools and equipment to maybe take a fire extinguisher training simulator to Arbor Glen, the fields, Boulder Ponds, for example, and our larger businesses to give them that training. And then that gives us the opportunity to interact with the residents. It gives us the opportunity to interact with the business owners, the managers, the employees, and build the relationships that we need to be building with folks to manage the community and its risk, for example.
Mike will have to go up to the podium to kind of talk about what he's been working on. This has been a kind of a timely thing. We've, the Washington County Fire Department dive team is, I'll let Mike get into it, but is kind of revamping its operations and kind of its structure. And it's something that we have not offered staff in the past or for a long time to be a part of. But I think, you know, with recent meetings and kind of reorganization of that, that group, Mike's been kind of spearheading that on what that could mean for us.
Sure. So I think Dustin's kind of talked on most of this, just from both a staffing perspective and also a service to the community, and for our ability to sort of interact with other departments and belong to a team that is sort of a shared resource. I think that there's definitely need for the resource in our city. And we've seen even recently over the last 2 years, there's been significant calls that might require that resource in the city of Lake Elmo. So last night and more recently, I've had several meetings with other departments that are part of that team. And they've been very receptive to us joining that resource and that ability to share that resource with them. So.
Washington County Fire Department?
So the Washington County Fire Chiefs Association,
Oh, the Chiefs Association.
fire department, the fire departments have, for years, have structured their own water rescue team. And it's slowly evolving to more of a technical rescue team involving rope rescue, low-angle rescue, and water. We have not been an active participant in that group. We've kind of been a bystander, and if we need something on the water, our current capabilities are limited. We call in the team, and the team comes, and along with the sheriff's department, dive support. So it's just kind of bolstering things that are already out in the community or in the county, and really adding our own staff to that mix as well. I bring that up because we always kind of look at not what can our staff do or what other things can they do when they're here, but it's what other paths do they have available to them in the fire service. Mike's a prime example. He's got a great history of technical rescue. I have another 2-year firefighter that is a master diver. And we can utilize that skill here by, being a part of this team and offering that potential rescue resource to our residents as well. So that's just one, piece. And we bring it up because that, obviously, like anything else we do or we implement, takes some equipment costs, some things like that. But the example that we bring up with the dive team or the tech rescue team is those costs could be completely covered underneath this public safety dollar amount, and it wouldn't have to come out of our general fund dollar amount, or wouldn't have to be an ask, next year in budget planning.
So can you give an estimate of what that cost would be now?
Looking at equipment to have enough proper equipment that we kind of fall in line with that group now, it'd be about a $20,000 equipment ask to outfit, to have equipment for 3 individuals, and it would be 3 specific individuals.
And is that, did I hear you correct in saying there's not ongoing costs with that beyond the initial investment?
Most of these things, there's definitely going to be ongoing costs. The life of a tank or the life of a wetsuit and some of that equipment, we definitely have to keep in mind. And acknowledge that, many of these asks have some sort of life expectancy in them, and what that is and what those ongoing costs are. We would definitely have to come back with some other numbers to say, hey, this is what we're looking at our long-term costs for these things.
It would be helpful to understand what the annual.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
commitment is to
And really tonight, really kind of looking for guidance in what option we go. I worked with Finance Director Hadler, and we kind of came up with what we felt was two options. Option one would be, to create a fire department technology and equipment fund, similar to our vehicle replacement fund, where some of these purchases would be made out of. Follow the same process for quotes and bidding and acquiring things. Identify what those long-term costs to the department and the city would be, but utilizing this $553,000 to kind of go into that. Another option would be simply just to take that dollars and transfer it directly into the vehicle replacement fund and cover our costs that we incurred last year out of our vehicle replacement fund. I look at option one that as the better option for us because it truly does make a large immediate impact on our operations and what we do moving forward.
So on the blue sheet, it says 553,000, but in the report here, it says 523,000.
So the last year's vehicle replacement costs that we incurred were $523,000.
I see what you're saying.
So there would still be some dollars left over if we just made that direct transfer.
I recall we did some purchasing of, was that 800 megahertz handsets?
We did.
Or-
So we.
But that's not the system.
That's not the
itself.
repeater, no. We replaced our entire radio fleet in 2022, well, it's 2022, they showed up in early 2023. As we constructed the building and kind of realized as things were finishing up, that's when we encountered the radio coverage issues in the building.
What is something like that?
We've got a quote for anywhere between $22,000 and $28,000 for a piece of equipment like that.
Okay. Councilmember Backstrom.
I like the idea of the community risk programs, the reduction, because I know we've talked with, in past meetings with your call volumes around falls and things like that. So I would really like to see some of the money directed towards those community programs where we can engage more with the community, if possible.
Absolutely. One of the things I've been talking to is Washington County reached out to me not too long ago, and they're kind of either reorganizing some of their programs and wondering how they can maybe partner with fire departments to maybe assist with them or have some ideas. I know in my previous city, we partnered with the American Red Cross and on their smoke detector replacement program. Simple program, but the fire department staff would go and replace smoke detectors free of charge through this. It would just take staff time to go do it. But making an immediate impact over hundreds and hundreds of installs on that. And I look at, we think of a lot of our neighborhoods as fairly, new neighborhoods, but when you start getting homes of 7, 8, 9 years old, we're getting to the point where we look at all those smoke alarm and CO detector devices in there that need to be replaced at 10 years. So,
Oh, it'll beep and let you know.
yeah, mine just went off the other night.
It's
So,
like, what the heck is
it's things like that where I think we can use these dollars that frankly came out of nowhere and really put it to work in a number of ways that benefit not only our operations, but definitely impacts our residents firsthand. But like I said, there are a number of ways that other cities have utilized these dollars. I've talked with the administrator a little bit and talked with finance department, and I just feel like our first option of just creating this new fund, and, I have a folder of projects that we could get going on right away that definitely would make a true impact in what we're doing. But really look at this fund as how we look at the vehicle replacement fund. The dollars are there. We can adjust some budget dollars in the future to keep this fund growing and moving forward, but really take, $550,000 of seed money and really have a good start and really hit the ground running and make a big impact.
And I think we're looking for feedback from council in order to give feedback to the League of Minnesota Cities, as he had said earlier, where they're actually looking for what we're gonna spend this money on, and we would really appreciate feedback from council tonight.
Yeah, Councilmember Dragisich.
Yeah, and looking at this list of about 12 items that you have, I think it would be really helpful from my perspective anyway, if you could prioritize them and put a cost to them. I think the fund is a good idea, but if we had a list of, the first thing, the most important thing on this fund would be, I'll pick the divers, just for,
Sure.
for an example. And the next thing would be the community education, and then the 800 megahertz, and you kind of go down the line and say, we have 13 or 14 items, we have $553,000 to spend. Can we get through all of them? What's the most important that would make the biggest impact on the department and the residents? And then we could, come up with a plan to actually carry those out and work with finance to set up the fund and how this will proceed over time.
I would agree. I love the community risk reduction, but really, you guys are the experts in that field, right? And there is a cap on the dollars, so in any way that you could help maybe define that as a priorities that you guys see, I think that would be beneficial for us as a council to have that experience and expertise to lean on.
Yeah, absolutely. Just right now with the projects I've kind of identified, they're mainly, equipment or additional needs for the station or things like that. We're at about $270,000 roughly of those dollars. If you were to say, do whatever you need to do with that dollars, here you go. If you're okay, I'd like to continue to work with the finance department to kind of lay out the fund idea of that and continue to move that forward and come back and kind of say, here's our, as of today, current list of priorities. And, that will still definitely leave us plenty of dollars left in this fund for as we continue to grow. Another item I look at that we've talked about is, we have a budget for vehicle repairs and equipment repairs. That can take a hard left one time with a certain repair on a truck that, goes into double digits pretty quick. We have needs on the trucks, like tire replacements that can't necessarily schedule the exact day we need them, but within a year or two, knowing I'm gonna have to spend, $4,000 to $6,000 on a tire replacement for a vehicle. Or, our rescue truck's coming up on 5 years right now, and one of these days, we're gonna walk into the bay and you smell the batteries and they've had enough. And that's $1,500 replacement. Like, we can kind of schedule some of these ones, and I wanna look at this fund too, is to help us with some of those potential known repairs or replacements on our vehicles that are coming down the line too. And ultimately, helps us eliminate some need from the general fund, definitely in the future, because a lot of these requests or ideas that I have would be requests to the general fund at some point. Gear extractors in the station. Ours is 20 years old and is, one bad day away from needing replacement, but have to come to a general fund or take it out of the general fund where now these dollars don't have any impact to our residents.
Okay,
One last question.
yes, Councilmember
So
Baxter.
just out of curiosity, and you maybe already have something set up, but as I look through this list and just thinking about staff and supporting staff, do we have anything currently, a fund or resources that cover costs of mental health support or wellness? I just think of all the really bad calls that our department has gone out on, just
I
even the
think-
last year, and I worry
don't-
about that.
Yeah, we don't have anything specific, but I would say that by saying we're very fortunate in the state of Minnesota that 2017, 2018, the legislation did provide dollars to create MinFire, which is a well-rounded mental health, cardiac health, cancer prevention program specific to the fire service. And I've had staff at all departments I've been about that have been, since that's been implemented, to be able to use that. Does that mean that we can't bolster it with our own thing? I mean, there's plenty of different things that we can continue to look at that would support our staff's mental and physical health now and in the future. Absolutely. I mean, those are definitely things that are out there and we can look at for support. Like I said, the ideas that me and my staff have come up with right now, we don't utilize everything unless you were to say we need to transfer this all into our vehicle replacement fund right now. So I've got plenty of ideas, and I'll continue to work with Finance Department to kind of take a look at how this fund would get created, how we utilize it. Probably, you can help out if I'm missing something here, but would probably operate very similar to our current vehicle replacement fund. I'd have to follow our purchasing policies and come to you and, we're gonna make this purchase, here's our quotes, and we're gonna pay for it out of this, whatever fund we determine the name for, so.
Councilmember Holtz?
I like the fund. I appreciate just, feedback as to what the highest priorities are for now for some of the items, but I agree with Councilmember Beckstrom as well. If there's additional above and beyond for mental health, just say it. And I'm sure the council is always gonna be receptive, but just kind of a priority list of those. And the 800 megahertz thing is slightly upsetting in a brand-new building.
It's kind of one of those things you don't really know until you get there. There are, through our walkthroughs of being in this building, through the construction every day, our radios were pretty solid for coverage, but as soon as you start putting hard lids on things and you really get all the fit and finishes in and other electronics that are in the building, it definitely adjusted how things were.
So you're saying we shouldn't have put a roof on?
No, there's a lot of concrete here, and every building's a little different, But myself, the administrator too, will kind of keep an eye on what the current legislation is. If there are some needs where we have to they could pass a bill here in a couple of weeks and say, you have to now use these dollars by the end of the year, It was very broad last year when they initiated this, so.
Sure.
Would putting it all into a fund right now count as expending the fund that we received?
In its current eyes, there wasn't really anything that said you had to.
Sometimes when they get to these federal grants, you might remember some of the ARPA grants, you had to have a true, in order for them to count by the deadline, they had to be like obligated with a contract that was irrevocable in order to count it as being spent.
Right.
So, but that, like I said, they're just, LMC's just trying to forestall this type of extra burden on municipalities.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so for the next council workshop that will happen in May, it looks like we've got future work session agenda items for the MPC update on PFAS in Lake Elmo, open space PUD ordinance review, and community room policy discussion. With that, we'll adjourn this evening's city council workshop, 8:02.